Hello. Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. Wherever you are right now, whether you're tucked into bed, stretched out on a sofa, or somewhere quiet that belongs just to you tonight, you made a good choice coming here. This is a safe place, a slow place, a place where absolutely nothing is required of you except to rest. So if you'd like to get comfortable now, go ahead and do that. Adjust your pillow. Pull your blanket a little closer. Let your body find the position it wants to be in. There's no rush. Take your time. I'll be right here. When you're ready, and only when you're ready, I'd like to tell you what we're going to be doing together tonight. Tonight, we are going to take a very long, very gentle walk through the history of the dictionary. That's it. That's the whole thing. We're going to begin thousands of years ago, in ancient Mesopotamia, where the very first word lists were pressed into clay tablets by scribes who wanted to make sure the meaning of things wasn't forgotten. And from there, slowly and unhurriedly, we're going to move forward through time, through the printing press, through the first English dictionaries, through the great, decades-long effort to build the Oxford English Dictionary, through mistakes and ghost words and the arrival of the digital age, all the way up to the present day, where dictionaries and artificial intelligence are quietly working together in ways that would have astonished every scholar who ever sat down to write a definition by hand. It is a long story, a rich story, and tonight, we are going to take it at the most leisurely pace imaginable. I'll only say what this video is about once, because you don't need to think about it again after this. You don't need to follow along carefully. You don't need to remember anything. This is not a lecture. There will be no test. The information is simply here, drifting past you, the way a slow river drifts past the bank, gently, continuously, without asking anything of you at all. Now, I want to give you something, before we go any further. Permission. You have full and complete permission to fall asleep at any point in this video. Right now, if you'd like. In 5 minutes. In the middle of a sentence about Samuel Johnson or the Oxford English Dictionary, or how the printing press changed the world. Whenever your body is ready, whenever sleep comes for you, you are allowed to go. You don't need to hold on. You don't need to stay awake to be polite, or because you're worried about missing something important. Nothing here is so important that it can't be missed. The story will keep going whether you're with it or not. And if you drift off somewhere in the middle and wake up to find it still playing, that's exactly right. That's the whole point. This video will be here, steady and unhurried, for as long as you need it. So let go whenever you're ready. Sleep is not a failure tonight. Sleep is the destination. And I want you to know, because I think this matters. And because I think part of what makes it hard to rest sometimes is not knowing what's coming. Nothing dramatic is going to happen, eh? There will be no sudden loud noises, no startling music, no sharp changes in tone or energy or pace, no moment where the story takes a dark or distressing turn, no agency, no tension, nothing designed to wake you up or keep you alert or make your heart beat a little faster. What there will be is this, a quiet voice, moving slowly through a gentle story, at the same unhurried pace from beginning to end. The tone you hear right now, soft, calm, steady, is the tone you will hear for the rest of this video. It will not change. It will not surprise you. You can trust that. You can close your eyes knowing exactly what the next 2 hours will feel like, because they will feel like this, like right now. Like stillness and warmth and the comfortable weight of something interesting drifting past you in the dark. There are no sudden loud noises coming, no unexpected moments, nothing at all to brace for. You are completely safe. So, let's begin. A very long time ago, longer ago than is easy to imagine, human beings were already doing something remarkable. They were writing words down, not to tell stories, not to record the names of kings, but simply to explain what things meant. To say, Here's this word, and here's what it refers to, and I want to make sure that knowledge isn't lost. And from that simple, careful, quietly human impulse, the whole long story of the dictionary begins. Come with me. There's nowhere else you need to be tonight. And tonight, we're going to wander through that history together. Slowly, quietly. There's no rush at all. We'll move through centuries and continents, through clay and parchment and ink, and we'll let the story of the dictionary carry us gently along. So if you'd like to settle in now, find a comfortable position, let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow. We can begin right at the very beginning. And the beginning, it turns out, is made of clay. Imagine a room, if you can call it that, somewhere in ancient Mesopotamia, the land that now makes up modern-day Iraq. It is around 2300 BCE, which means we are more than 4,000 years in the past. More than 4,000 years. The world outside is dry and warm, the great rivers Tigris and Euphrates threading their way through a flat and dusty landscape. Inside, a scribe sits cross-legged, or perhaps kneeling, holding a small rectangular block of damp clay. In their hand, a stylus, a simple reed, cut to a point, and they are pressing shapes into the clay. Wedge-shaped marks, over and over, in careful rows. This writing system is called cuneiform, one of the earliest forms of writing ever developed. And what this scribe is creating is not a poem, not a prayer, not a record of grain stored in a nearby warehouse. What they are making is a list of words, words in one language, set beside their equivalents in another, a bilingual word list. What we might, if we were feeling generous with our definitions, call a very early dictionary. These lists were created by the Sumerians and the Akkadians, two great civilizations who shared the same part of the world and, to some extent, the same written tradition. The Akkadians adopted cuneiform script from the Sumerians, but spoke an entirely different language. And so, practical as people have always been, scholars began creating reference documents, lists that said, in effect, if you know the Sumerian word, here's how you say it in Akkadian. Here's the bridge between one world and another. Those clay tablets have survived. Some of them, buried under centuries of sand and rubble, baked hard by the sun. They waited for archaeologists, for historians, for people patient enough to piece them back together and read the marks left by hands that had been still for millennia. And when those marks were finally read, there they were, lists of words, carefully made, quietly extraordinary. Among those ancient records, one compilation stands out above the rest, so much so that scholars still speak of it today with a certain reverence. It was called the Ura equals Hubulu, and it was not a small undertaking. Not at all. The Ura equals Hubulu spanned 24 tablets, 24 separate clay documents, each one covered in tight, careful rows of cuneiform script. Together, they formed something closer to an encyclopedia than a simple word list, a vast, methodical attempt to organize and record the known world through the medium of language. The tablets covered trees and wooden objects, plants, animals, birds and fish and insects, stones and minerals, foods and drinks, garments, geographic terms, gods and their many names and titles. To read through the Ura equals Hubulu, or to imagine reading through it, slowly, tablet by tablet, is to feel the quiet ambition of the people who made it. They were not simply listing words for practical convenience. They were doing something more profound. They were drawing a map of reality using language as the compass. They were saying, here's the world, and here's what everything in it is called. There's something very human about that, and something very soothing, too, in the idea of a scribe carefully pressing the name of a bird into soft clay, then the name of a fish, then the name of a tree, each one placed just so, in its proper order, part of a larger whole. Take a slow breath in, and let it go. Across the world, on the other side of the known knife, a different civilization was doing something remarkably similar. China, in the 3rd century BCE, was already ancient by most standards, a civilization with deep roots in literature, philosophy, and scholarship. And it was during this period that a text came into being that scholars would one day recognize as the oldest surviving monolingual dictionary in the world. It was called the Area. The name itself is sometimes translated as something like approaching correctness or near to elegance, which is a rather beautiful thing to call a dictionary, if you think about it. Not just a list of words, but an attempt to approach the correct use of language. A gentle aspiration toward clarity. The Area was different from the Mesopotamian tablets in an important way. It was not bilingual. It was not translating from one language to another. Instead, it was explaining words within the same language, taking old or difficult words from classical texts, the kinds of words that were becoming obscure even by the 3rd century BCE, and offering clearer, more familiar equivalents. In other words, it was doing something we still do today, noticing that language changes over time, that words fall out of use, that meanings shift, and trying to keep the older texts accessible to later readers. The Area covered words for relationships and social roles, words for buildings and tools, the names of plants, animals, insects, fish. It was organized not alphabetically. Chinese doesn't work that way, but by topic, by category. Things that belong together, grouped together. It survived, passed down and replicated over centuries. It survived, and today it sits at the very beginning of a long tradition of Chinese lexicography, the art and science of dictionary making, that continued for more than 2,000 years. In a quieter corner of the same ancient world, Greek scholars were doing their own careful work with words. By the 1st century of the Common Era, scholars in the Greek-speaking world had begun to notice something that any thoughtful reader eventually notices. The meanings of words are not fixed. They move. They drift. A word that meant one thing 200 years ago might mean something subtly different today. And a text written centuries in the past might contain words whose original meanings had become clouded by time. And so Greek scholars began tracking those changes, writing down words from older texts, from Homer, from the great dramatists, from philosophical writings, and explaining what they had originally meant, how they had been used, what the correct interpretation was. These glossaries and lexicons were tools of scholarship and careful reading, designed to preserve understanding across the slow changes of time. There's something lovely about that, about people sitting with old texts and asking, gently, what did this mean? Then, when it was written, it's a kind of archaeological work done entirely with language, brushing away the dust of centuries not with a tool, but with careful thought. Further west, in the flourishing world of early Arabic scholarship, a different approach to organizing language was taking shape. In the 8th century CE, a scholar named Al-Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, one of the most brilliant minds of his age, created a dictionary called the Kitab al-Ain, the Book of the Letter Ain. What made the Kitab al-Ain remarkable and genuinely unusual was how it was organized, not alphabetically, as we might expect, not by topic, like the Area, but by sound, specifically by the place in the mouth and throat where each sound is produced. Al-Khalil began with the deepest sounds, those made at the back of the throat, and worked his way forward through the mouth to the lips. It was a system rooted in the understanding of language as a physical thing, as breath shaped by the body. The letter Ain, a deep, throaty consonant in Arabic with no real equivalent in English, sat at the very back of this sequence, which is why the dictionary began with it and was named for it. From there, Al-Khalil methodically worked through every possible combination of root consonants in the Arabic language, calculating, with what we can only assume was extraordinary patience, all the words that could theoretically exist and noting which of them were actually in use. It was a work of breathtaking intellectual ambition. A dictionary, yes, but also a meditation on the very structure of language itself. Let your thoughts drift a little. There's nothing to hold tightly to right now. Centuries later, in Europe, Latin was still the language of scholarship, the thread that connected monasteries and universities, the tongue in which learned men wrote to one another across borders and kingdoms. And in 1287, a Dominican friar named Johannes Balbus completed a work he called the Catholicon, a name meaning something like universal or comprehensive. The Catholicon was not quite what we'd recognize as a modern dictionary, but it was moving in that direction. It included a guide to Latin grammar, a discussion of language and rhetoric, and a substantial glossary, an explanation of Latin words that would help readers understand the texts they encountered. It was intended to be useful, to be practical, to be the kind of book a scholar or a clergyman could turn to when they needed help. And then, in 1460, more than a century and a half after it was first written, the Catholicon became something new. It was printed, set in type and reproduced by the newly invented printing press. It became one of the first reference works in history to exist in multiple identical copies, each one available to be carried to a different monastery, a different university, a different city. The word, in a sense, had been set free. Meanwhile, on the islands of Japan, the 9th century was already producing its own careful record of language. In 835 CE, during the reign of Emperor Juana and under the supervision of the scholar Kukai, a reference work called the Tenrei Bansho Meiji was compiled. It was a collection of official court terminology, the specific, formal language of Japanese imperial administration and Buddhist scholarship, Chinese characters with their Japanese readings, the vocabulary of governance and ceremony, gathered and preserved. It served a very particular world, the world of court officials and Buddhist monks, of ritual and protocol. But in doing so, it reminds us that dictionaries have always been, at their heart, practical objects. They exist because someone, somewhere, needed to understand something, needed to know what a word meant, or how it was pronounced, or how it was properly written. And that, perhaps, is the most comforting thing about all of this. These ancient word lists, whether pressed into Mesopotamian clay, brushed onto Chinese silk, carefully calculated by an Arabic linguist, or printed by a European friar, were all made for the same quiet reason: to help, to make understanding a little easier, to take the vast, shifting, complicated thing that language is, and hold a small part of it still, just long enough for someone to look at it clearly. At this point in history, dictionaries were not for ordinary people. They were tools for scholars and clergy, for translators working between languages, for learned men navigating old texts. The idea of a dictionary as something an everyday person might own, might reach for on a shelf at home, was still a very long way away. But the impulse that made them was already ancient, already human, already, in its way, beautiful. Let that thought settle softly around you now. 4,000 years of people carefully, patiently, writing down what things mean. Long before you were here, long before anyone you know was here, the words were already being tended to, already being kept safe. Rest now. There's nothing you need to do. Just breathe, and let the history continue at its own quiet pace. The next part of the story will be here when you're ready. There are moments in history that act like doors. Quiet, almost unremarkable at first. A hinge turning, a latch lifting, and then, slowly, everything on the other side begins to change. The world that existed before the door opened continues for a little while, carrying on as it always had, not quite realizing yet that something fundamental has shifted. And then, gradually, the change becomes undeniable. The light coming through the open door is different. The air is different. Nothing will be quite the same again. The invention of the printing press was one of those moments, but we'll get to that in its own time. There's no hurry tonight. Let's arrive at it slowly, the way all the best things in history arrive, with a little context, a little patience, and a sense of how extraordinary the ordinary can be when you look at it closely enough. So settle in a little more comfortably now, if you'd like. Let your body feel heavy and warm against whatever you're resting on. Let your breathing find its own gentle rhythm. And let's talk about what the world of the written word looked like before that door swung open, because understanding the before makes the after feel all the more remarkable. Before the printing press, books were made by hand, every single one of them. A scribe, a person whose entire professional life was devoted to the careful, painstaking work of writing, would sit at a desk, often in a monastery or wealthy household, and copy a text word by word, letter by letter, from an existing manuscript. The work was slow. It was exacting. A single Bible might take a skilled scribe the better part of a year to complete. A longer, more complex work might take several years. And because each copy required this enormous investment of time and labor, books were rare, extraordinarily rare. They were expensive objects, often decorated with intricate illustrations and illuminated with gold leaf. And they were owned almost exclusively by institutions, churches, monasteries, universities, or by the very wealthy. An ordinary person, a farmer or a craftsman or merchant's apprentice, would likely never own a book in their lifetime, might never even hold one. Knowledge, in other words, was a guarded thing, not always deliberately, not always unkindly, but structurally, inevitably, by the sheer cost and difficulty of reproducing it. If you wanted access to a particular text, you needed access to the place where that text was kept. You needed to be the kind of person who was allowed inside that place. And you needed to be able to read, which was itself a skill that, in the medieval world, was far from universal. Dictionaries and reference works existed within this world. They were manuscripts, handwritten and laboriously copied, housed in monastery libraries and university collections. Useful, yes. Valuable, certainly. But finite, fixed in number, confined to the places wealthy and powerful enough to commission them. And then, in the middle of the 15th century, in a workshop in the German city of Mainz, a goldsmith and inventor named Johannes Gutenberg changed all of that. Gutenberg's great insight, or rather, the great insight that he spent years refining and perfecting, was the idea of movable type. Individual letters, each one cast from a metal alloy, that could be arranged into words and sentences, pressed onto paper using ink, and then rearranged to print something else entirely. It sounds simple enough when described that way. It was, in practice, an achievement of extraordinary ingenuity and patience. The technical challenges alone were formidable. The metal alloy had to be exactly right, hard enough to hold its shape through many impressings, but precise enough to be cast into the small, exact forms of individual letters. The ink had to be a particular consistency, thick and oil-based, to adhere properly to the metal type and transfer cleanly to the paper. The press itself, adapted from the kinds of screw presses already used in winemaking and papermaking, had to apply even, consistent pressure across the entire page. Every element of the system had to work together, reliably and repeatedly. By around 1450, Gutenberg had solved enough of these problems to begin printing in earnest. His most famous early work, the Gutenberg Bible, was completed sometime around 1455. It is a thing of astonishing beauty, pages so clean and evenly printed that early readers sometimes assumed they must have been written by hand by a particularly skilled scribe. The idea that a machine had produced them seemed almost impossible. But a machine had produced them, and not just one copy, dozens of copies, each one identical, each one produced in a fraction of the time it would have taken a scribe. The door had opened. The light was coming through. Within decades, printing presses had spread across Europe, from Mainz to Cologne, Strasbourg, Basel, to Venice and Rome, to Paris and Lyon, to London. Printers set up workshops in cities and towns, producing books and pamphlets and broadsides in quantities that would have seemed fantastical just a generation earlier. The price of books began to fall. Slowly at first, then more steeply. They became, if not cheap exactly, at least accessible to a far wider range of people than before. And as printing spread, something important happened to the way typefaces, the design of the printed letters themselves, began to develop. In Venice, in the 1470s, a French-born printer named Nicolas Jenson was doing something that, on the surface, sounds quite modest. He was designing a typeface, a set of letterforms that would be used to cast as metal type, and which would therefore determine what every page printed in his workshop looked like. But Jenson's typeface was something new. It was based on the clear, upright, beautifully proportioned letters of ancient Roman inscriptions, the kind of lettering carved into stone monuments and triumphal arches. His Roman typeface was clean, open, and easy to read. The letters were carefully spaced. The proportions were elegant without being fussy. Pages set in Jenson's type had a quality of quiet clarity that made reading them feel effortless. It is difficult to overstate how much this mattered. Reading, in the medieval manuscript tradition, could be genuinely hard work. Scripts varied enormously from one scriptorium to another. Letters were often compressed or elaborately decorated in ways that prioritized beauty over legibility. But Jenson was thinking about the reader, about the eye moving across the page, about the ease with which words could be taken in and understood. His Roman typeface became enormously influential. It was copied, adapted, and refined by printers across Europe, and its descendants are still with us today. The typeface you might be reading on a screen right now, or the one printed in the book on your nightstand, almost certainly traces some part of its lineage back to what Jenson was quietly working out in his Venetian workshop 5.5 centuries ago. Let your eyes close a little more, if they haven't already. There's nothing to look at, just the sound of these words, drifting slowly past. And now, into this expanding world of print, comes the first dictionary printed in English. It arrived in 1499, a full 44 years after Gutenberg's Bible, and it was called the Promptorium Parvulorum. The name is Latin, and it means something like storehouse for children, or sometimes translated as warehouse of the little ones, which tells you quite a lot about who it was made for and what it was trying to do. The Promptorium Parvulorum had actually been compiled some decades earlier, around 1440, by a Dominican friar known as Galfredus Grammaticus, Geoffrey the Grammarian, in English. But it wasn't printed until 1499, when the London printer Wynkyn de Word, himself a fascinating figure, a student of William Caxton who had brought the printing press to England, set it in type and made it available in multiple copies for the first time. The dictionary was designed to help students. Specifically, it helped students who were learning Latin, which in the late medieval period was still the language of scholarship, the church, and much of official life. It was organized English to Latin. You looked up an English word and found its Latin equivalent. Around 12,000 entries, arranged alphabetically, covering a wide range of everyday vocabulary. Think about what that meant for a student in 1499. Before printed dictionaries existed, if you needed to know the Latin word for something, for bread, or hand, or sky, you either asked a teacher, or you consulted a manuscript reference work that you almost certainly didn't own and might have to travel to find. Now, for the first time, you could hold the answer in your hands. A small, printed book, yours to keep, yours to carry, yours to turn to whenever you needed it. It wasn't much, by the standards of what would come later, but it was a beginning. A quiet, practical, enormously significant beginning. The centuries that followed saw the printing press continue to evolve, slowly, steadily. Each generation of printers and engineers finding new ways to make the process faster, more efficient, more capable of meeting the ever-growing appetite for printed material. For a long time, the fundamental mechanism remained recognizably similar to what Gutenberg had invented: a flat bed of type, a flat plate pressing paper against it, ink applied by hand, skilled and relatively fast by the standards of manuscript copying, but still limited in how many pages could be produced in a given hour. And then, in 1843, an American inventor named Richard Hoe changed the equation dramatically. Hoe's invention was the rotary press. Instead of a flat plate pressing down onto a flat bed of type, Hoe's press used a large rotating cylinder. The type, or later, curved printing plates, was attached to the surface of the cylinder, and as it spun, sheets of paper were fed through continuously, pressed against the ink type by smaller cylinders. The movement was constant, fluid, uninterrupted. No more lifting and lowering. No more pausing between sheets. The numbers tell the story clearly enough. A good hand press in the early 19th century might produce a few hundred sheets per hour with considerable effort. Hoe's rotary press could print 8,000 sheets per hour. 8,000. That number is worth sitting with for a moment. 8,000 pages, rolling off a machine every hour, carrying words, any words, out into the world. Newspapers, pamphlets, books, information, moving through society at a speed that had simply never been possible before. For dictionaries, all of this mattered enormously, because a dictionary is only useful if people can get hold of it. The most meticulous, carefully researched, beautifully organized collection of words in the world does nothing sitting in a single monastery library, or existing in a handful of expensive hand-copied manuscripts. A dictionary needs to reach people. It needs to be there, on a desk or a shelf, when someone reaches for it. The printing press made that possible, and with each improvement to the press, with Jensen's cleaner typefaces making pages easier to read, with Hoe's rotary press making production faster and cheaper, the circle of people who could own and use a dictionary grew wider. Scholars and clergy first, then merchants and lawyers and educated professionals, then, gradually, students, then, eventually, ordinary households. The idea that a family might keep a dictionary at home, might consult it at the dinner table, or pull it down from a shelf to settle an argument about a word, was still in the future. But that future was becoming imaginable in a way it simply hadn't been before. Knowledge was beginning its long, slow journey out of the monastery and into the world. There is something quietly wonderful about following that journey, about thinking of all the hands through which a single word has passed, the scribe who first recorded it, the scholar who noted its meaning, the printer who set it in metal type, the bookseller who wrapped it in paper, the student who carried it home and opened it at a rough wooden table by candlelight. Each link in that chain mattered. Each small improvement, a better alloy for casting type, a cleaner letterform, a faster press, carried the words a little further, put them into a few more hands, made understanding a little more available to a few more people. And tonight, in whatever room you're in, wherever you are in the world, you are somewhere at the far end of that very long chain. The words you encounter every day, in books, on screens, in the dictionary you might look something up and without giving it a second thought, arrived at you through centuries of that quiet, patient work. Let that be a gentle thing to rest with. You are part of a very long story. And right now, you don't have to do anything at all. Just let the story continue, softly, while you rest. The next chapter is waiting, but there's no rush to get to it. Sleep, if sleep is ready for you. The words will still be here. Language is a living thing. It grows and changes, spreads and shifts, picks up new words from the people it meets and quietly lets old ones go. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for scholars to approve of what it's doing. It simply moves, the way water moves, finding the paths of least resistance, pooling in some places, rushing forward in others, always seeking its own level. And for a very long time, English was doing exactly that, growing and changing and spreading, without anyone making a serious attempt to write it all down, to gather it, to say, here it is, here is English, as it stands today, in one place, between two covers. Other languages had their guardians. The French had the Académie Française, founded in 1635, tasked with preserving and regulating the French language with great official seriousness. Italian scholars had long debated the correct forms of their literary tongue. Latin, of course, had been studied and catalogued for centuries. But English, rough, adaptable, gloriously mongrel English, with its roots in Anglo-Saxon and Norse and Norman French and Latin and Greek and a dozen other sources besides, English had been largely left to its own devices. Until, at the very beginning of the 17th century, one quiet schoolmaster decided to do something about it. His name was Robert Corddry. We don't know a great deal about him. He was a schoolmaster and a Church of England minister, living and working in the English Midlands in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. He had a practical mind and a teacher's instinct for what his students needed. And what he noticed, looking at the landscape of the English language in 1604, was a problem. English at that time was undergoing a kind of vocabulary explosion. Scholars and writers, influenced by the Renaissance love of classical learning, were flooding the language with new words borrowed from Latin and Greek. These inkhorn terms, as critics called them with some disdain, were appearing in books and sermons and official documents, and many ordinary readers simply didn't know what they meant. There was no place to look them up, no reference work that explained, in plain English, what all these difficult, learned, foreign-sounding words actually meant. Corddry decided to make one. In 1604, he published a small book called A Table Alphabetical. The full title, in the elaborate fashion of the time, went on considerably longer. It explained that the book contained hard usual English words borrowed from the Hebrew, Greek, Latin, or French and was intended to help ladies, gentlewomen, or any other unskilled persons to understand what they were reading. The intended reader, in other words, was not a scholar. It was an ordinary, educated person who kept encountering words they couldn't understand and had nowhere to turn. The book was small, modest, even. It contained somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 entries, just the hard words, the unusual ones, the borrowed and difficult terms. Each entry was brief, a word, followed by a short explanation, sometimes just a single synonym. It wasn't trying to be comprehensive. It wasn't trying to capture the whole of the English language. It was trying to be useful. And it was. Because the table alphabetical was something that had never existed before. A dictionary of English, for English speakers, organized alphabetically from A to Z. The first of its kind. A small, unpretentious, genuinely revolutionary little book. Let yourself sink a little deeper into wherever you're resting. There's a comfort in smallness, sometimes, in the modest and the practical, in someone simply noticing a problem and quietly solving it. In the decades that followed Corddry, other dictionaries appeared, each one building on the last, each one a little larger, a little more ambitious, a little more aware of what a dictionary could be. The 17th century saw a steady accumulation of these reference works. Thomas Blount's Glossographia in 1656, Edward Phillips's New World of Words in 1658, Alicia Coles's Dictionary in 1676. They were still, largely, focused on difficult and unusual words, still more concerned with explaining the strange and the learned than with capturing the full range of everyday English. They were building on a much older tradition, too, the medieval manuscript glosses that had existed for centuries. Those marginal notes that scholars had written in the borders of manuscripts, explaining a difficult Latin word or a technical term to whoever might read the page after them. Quiet annotations, passed forward through time. The dictionaries of the 17th century were, in some ways, those marginal glosses finally given a home of their own. But a turning point was coming. A moment when someone would look at what a dictionary had been. A list of hard words, a scholar's tool, a modest reference for the confused reader, and imagine something far larger, something that would try to capture not just the difficult and the unusual, but the whole vast, complicated, magnificent breadth of the English language. That someone was Samuel Johnson, and what he produced would change everything. Samuel Johnson is one of those figures from history who seems almost too vivid to be real. Large in body and personality, brilliant and argumentative and deeply, sometimes painfully human. He was by the 1740s already a well-known writer and critic in London, a man who had made his way in the literary world through sheer intelligence and an extraordinary command of language, despite having grown up in relative poverty and spent only a little over a year at Oxford before financial difficulties forced him to leave without a degree. In 1746, a group of London booksellers approached Johnson with a proposal. They wanted him to compile a comprehensive dictionary of the English language. A real one, not just a list of difficult words, but a genuine, thorough, authoritative record of English as it was actually written and spoken by educated people. Something that would bring order and stability to a language that many felt was in danger of becoming too variable, too chaotic, too full of fad and fashion. Johnson accepted. He estimated it would take about 3 years. It took 9. 9 years of work, carried out in a garret in London with a small team of assistants, mostly Scottish, a fact Johnson noted with his characteristic dry wit. Surrounded by mountains of books, loose papers, and the accumulated vocabulary of centuries. Johnson read, he marked, he cut out passages, pinned them to sheets of paper, organized them by the words they illustrated. He wrote definitions. He reconsidered them. He wrote them again. The scale of what he produced is, even now, remarkable to contemplate. A dictionary of the English language was published in 1755 in 2 large folio volumes. It contained more than 40,000 entries, 40,000 words, each one carefully defined, many of them illustrated with literary quotations showing how the word had been used by writers across the centuries. And not just a handful of quotations, the dictionary contained 114,000 of them. 114,000 carefully chosen passages from Shakespeare and Milton, from the King James Bible, from Francis Bacon and John Dryden and Alexander Pope and dozens of other writers, each one selected to illuminate the meaning and proper usage of a particular word. Johnson wasn't just defining words. He was building a monument to English literature at the same time. Every definition was, in a sense, also a small act of cultural curation, a way of saying, here is how our greatest writers have used this word. Here is the tradition you are inheriting when you use it yourself. The work was sold in sets, and it was not cheap. The price, by the standards of the time, was significant, comparable, in today's money, to something in the region of $7,500 per set. This was not, to put it plainly, a dictionary for everyone. It was a dictionary for the educated and the prosperous. But it was also something that had never existed before in the English-speaking world, and its influence spread far beyond the people who could afford to own it. Johnson's dictionary did something else, too, something that went beyond the simple work of definition. It helped to standardize the spelling and usage of English at a moment when standardization mattered enormously. England in the 18th century was not simply a small island nation. It was an expanding imperial power, with colonies and trading posts and outposts of English language and culture spreading across the world. A shared, consistent standard of English, a way of writing and spelling that educated people across that vast geographic spread could agree on, was not just useful. It was, in a sense, a tool of cohesion, a way of keeping a far-flung world linguistically connected. Johnson's dictionary, for all its imperfections, provided something of that standard. It was consulted, cited, deferred to. It shaped the way English was written and taught for generations. When we spell words the way we do today, when we make the choices we make about usage and form, some of that is Johnson's influence, still quietly present, more than 2.5 centuries later. Breathe slowly. Let those centuries settle around you like a soft blanket. There is something restful about deep time. But here's the thing about Johnson's dictionary, the thing that makes it, perhaps, more human and more lovable than its enormous size and serious reputation might suggest. It was not perfect, not even close. Johnson was one man, brilliantly intelligent, enormously well-read, but one man, working through 40,000 words over 9 years, defining them from his own knowledge and reading, without any of the systematic tools that later lexicographers would develop. And sometimes, he got things wrong. The most famous example, the one that has been quoted and retold ever since, involves a horse. In his dictionary, Johnson defined the word pastern as the knee of a horse. The pastern is not the knee of a horse. It is, in fact, the part of a horse's leg between the fetlock and the hoof. Quite a different thing entirely, and the distinction would be obvious to anyone with even a passing familiarity with horses, which in 18th century England was most people. The error was noticed. At some point, the story goes, a woman asked Johnson, directly, how he came to make such a mistake. How could the author of this great, authoritative dictionary have defined pastern so incorrectly? And Johnson, without missing a beat, without apparent embarrassment, without any attempt at a convoluted explanation, looked at her and said, "Ignorance, madam, pure ignorance." There is something deeply, warmly wonderful about that reply. In 4 words, Johnson managed to be completely honest, entirely disarming, and faintly hilarious all at once. He didn't bluster. He didn't claim the definition was actually correct if you looked at it in a Satan light. He didn't blame his assistants or cite an obscure authority. He simply admitted the truth. He hadn't known, and so he had guessed, and he had guessed wrong. It is a reminder that lexicography, the careful, painstaking, scholarly work of compiling dictionaries, has always been, at its heart, a human enterprise, done by people with blind spots and assumptions and gaps in their knowledge, people who sometimes looked at a word, thought they knew what it meant, wrote down a definition, and moved on without checking, people who got tired, late in the afternoon of a long working day, with hundreds more entries still to write, and perhaps didn't quite give every word the attention it deserved. Human error was always part of lexicography. It still is. It always will be. Because dictionaries are not made by machines or handed down from some perfect source of linguistic authority. They are made by people, doing their best with what they have, trying to capture something as vast and slippery and alive as language in the still, fixed form of a printed page. That is both the limitation and the wonder of them. So here we are, at the close of this part of our journey. We've come from a small schoolmaster's modest little book of hard words, 2,500 entries, designed to help ordinary readers, to a 9U monument of 40,000 entries, 114,000 literary quotations, and at least one memorably wrong definition of a horse's anatomy. What connects all of it is the same quiet impulse we found at the very beginning of this history, in those clay tablets pressed in ancient Mesopotamia. The desire to make meaning available, to take the complicated, shifting, sometimes confusing thing that language is and offer a hand, a guide, a reference, a place to look when you're not sure. Sometimes that hand belongs to a Dominican friar in medieval England. sometimes to a Venetian printer perfecting his typefaces by candlelight, sometimes to a large, brilliant, occasionally mistaken man in a London garret, surrounded by books and papers, working his way through the alphabet one word at a time, all of them, in their different ways, trying to help. Let that be the last thought for this segment, that across all these centuries, in all these different places, the work of language has always been, at its most fundamental, an act of care. Someone reaching towards someone else across the distance of confusion and saying, "Hey, let me help you understand." Rest in that. Let your thoughts grow quiet. The story of the dictionary is long and slow and full of unexpected corners, and we will find our way through more of it together, gently, in its own time. There's a particular kind of stubbornness that history tends to reward. Not the loud, aggressive kind. Not the stubbornness of the person who simply refuses to listen, who digs in their heels out of pride or fear or a simple unwillingness to be wrong. But the other kind. The quiet, patient, decades-long stubbornness of someone who has looked at the world, decided that something important is missing from it, and resolved, with complete calm and total determination, to put it there themselves. Noah Webster had that kind of stubbornness, and over the course of a long, remarkable, occasionally maddening life, he used it to do something that no one had ever done before. He sat down, or rather, he stood, because Webster famously preferred to write at a tall standing desk, and he defined America, not its borders, not its laws, not its system of government, but its language, its words, the way it spelled them, and what it meant by them, and why those things mattered. But before we get to Webster and his great dictionary, it's worth pausing for a moment on the world into which he was born, because the America of the late 18th century was a place in the middle of a very large question about itself, and language was, quietly but insistently, part of that question. Webster was born in 1758 in West Hartford, Connecticut, just 17 years before the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. He grew up, in other words, in a colonial America, a place that was, culturally and linguistically, still very much looking toward England for its standards and its authority. English books, English spellings, English grammar. These were the models that educated Americans were expected to follow. The idea that America might develop its own distinct literary and linguistic identity was still, for most people, not quite thinkable. England was the source. America was the outpost. The Revolution changed that politically, of course. But changing the politics of a nation and changing the way its people think about themselves are two very different things. And the second is always slower and harder than the first. In the years after independence, many Americans were still writing and spelling in the English way, still looking to London for cultural authority, still treating their own language as a provincial version of something more correct and more important happening somewhere else. Webster found this intolerable. He believed, with a conviction that never wavered across more than 50 years of work, that America needed to own its language, that the new nation deserved a linguistic identity as independent as its political one, that American English was not a degraded or inferior form of the real thing, but a living, valid, distinct variety of the language, shaped by its own geography and history and people, and deserving of its own authoritative record. He spent most of his adult life trying to make that argument, and in 1828, at the age of 70, he finished making it. An American Dictionary of the English Language was published in 2 large volumes in 1828. It contained 70,000 words, 30,000 more than Johnson's Great Dictionary of 1755, which had itself seemed enormous when it appeared. Among those 70,000 entries were 12,000 words that had never appeared in any dictionary before, words that had grown up in America, that had been coined or adapted or borrowed to describe the particular realities of American life, words for the landscape, for the wildlife, for the political and social institutions of the new republic, words that Johnson's dictionary simply didn't contain, because they belonged to a world that Johnson had never known. The physical object was impressive in its own right. The 2-volume set weighed 20 pounds. 20 pounds of words, of definitions and etymologies and examples, carefully researched and written out over the course of what had been, for Webster, a process of decades. He had taught himself more than 20 languages in order to trace the roots of English words back to their origins. He had corresponded with scholars across Europe and America. He had revised and reconsidered and, occasionally, changed his mind. He had worked on it, on and off, for most of his adult life, and the final product showed every year of that labor. But perhaps the most immediately noticeable thing about Webster's dictionary, the thing that struck readers the moment they opened it, the thing that still strikes us today, was the spelling. Webster had strong opinions about spelling, very strong opinions. He had been arguing for spelling reform since the 1780s, when he published a little spelling book, known familiarly as the Blue-Backed Speller, that became one of the best-selling books in American history. His view was simple. English spelling was unnecessarily complicated, full of silent letters and historical remnants that served no practical purpose and made the language harder to learn than it needed to be. And beyond the practical argument, there was the political one. American spelling, in Webster's vision, should look American. It should be distinct from British spelling. It should be a small but visible declaration of independence, made every time someone wrote a word down. And so, in Webster's dictionary, the British color became the American color. The U, which had always been there, inherited from the French couleur, was quietly removed. Similarly, honor became honor, flavor became flavor, neighbor became neighbor. The re-endings of British words like center and theater were reversed to o, center, theater. Some double consonants were simplified. Some silent letters were dropped. Not all of Webster's proposed reforms took hold. He had wanted to go considerably further than he eventually did, and some of his more radical suggestions were quietly ignored by the reading public. But the changes that did stick are with us still, embedded in American English so completely that most Americans today would find the British spelling slightly strange, slightly foreign-looking, rather than the other way around. Webster did that. One stubborn man with a standing desk and a very clear sense of what American English should look like, writing it all down in 2 volumes that together weighed 20 pounds. The spelling of a nation, quietly decided. Let your body be heavy now, the way those volumes were heavy, solid, and still, and at rest. Webster died in 1843, at the age of 84. Having spent the last years of his life continuing to revise and expand his dictionary. He did not live to see what happened next, but what happened next was, in its own way, just as important as the dictionary itself. 2 brothers from Springfield, Massachusetts, George and Charles Merriam, had been running a small printing and bookselling business for some years when Webster died. They recognized an opportunity, and they moved quickly to take it. In 1843, they acquired the rights to Webster's dictionary from his estate, and they set about doing something that Webster himself had never quite managed to do, making the dictionary affordable. Webster's 2-volume set, for all its importance and brilliance, had been expensive. It was the kind of book that institutions bought, that wealthy households might aspire to own, that lawyers and ministers and educated professionals kept on their shelves. It was not, in any practical sense, a book for ordinary families. The Merriams changed that. In 1847, they published a revised edition of Webster's dictionary, updated and corrected by a Yale professor named Chauncey Goodrich, and they priced it at $6. $6. For a dictionary containing 70,000 words and the accumulated lexicographical labor of one of the most determined scholars in American history. $6 was not nothing, of course. In 1847, $6 represented a day's wages or more for many working people, but it was, compared to what had come before, genuinely accessible. It was the kind of price that a reasonably prosperous working family might save up for, that a school teacher or a small farmer or tradesman might realistically afford. The dictionary was no longer just for the educated elite. It was becoming, slowly, something that ordinary homes might contain. And that mattered enormously, because a dictionary in an ordinary home is a different thing from a dictionary in a university library. It gets used differently, consulted differently, lived with differently. Children grow up with it. Families argue over it. Someone pulls it down from the shelf on a Tuesday evening to settle a question that came up at the dinner table, and finds themselves reading 3 other entries by accident before they put it back. The words become familiar, become part of the furniture of the mind in a way that they can't when the dictionary lives behind a counter in a library and has to be requested and retained. The Merriams understood this. They kept revising. They kept updating. The Merriam-Webster dictionary became a living thing, not a fixed monument like Johnson's great work, but an ongoing project, updated to reflect the changes in the language, the new words coming in, the old ones shifting in meaning. It became, in a very real sense, the people's dictionary. And then, in 1961, Merriam-Webster did something that caused an extraordinary amount of fuss. They published a new edition, Webster's Third New International Dictionary, and in it, tucked among the hundreds of thousands of entries, was a word that a great many people felt very strongly should not be there. The word was ain't. Ain't, that cheerfully informal contraction, used in conversation by millions of people across America and the English-speaking world, but regarded by teachers and prescriptivists and the linguistically proper as a barbarism, a solecism, an error. Not a real word. Not acceptable. The kind of thing you said when you didn't know any better, and stopped saying when you did. And now here it was, in the dictionary, defined, legitimized, given the same treatment as any other word. The reaction was, to put it mildly, spirited. Newspapers editorialized. Language columnists raged. The New York Times declared that the dictionary had surrendered to the forces of ignorance. Critics argued that by including ain't, Merriam-Webster had abandoned its responsibility to maintain standards, had decided to simply record what people said, rather than tell them what they should say. Merriam-Webster's response was, essentially, that this was precisely the point. A dictionary's job was to describe language as it was actually used, not to prescribe how it ought to be used. If millions of people used ain't in everyday speech, then ain't was a word, regardless of whether English teachers approved of it. Leaving it out of the dictionary wouldn't make it dissipate. It would just make the dictionary incomplete. This argument between the descriptivists, who believed dictionaries should record language as it is, and the prescriptivists, who believed dictionaries should uphold standards and guide usage, was not new in 1961. It had been bubbling away beneath the surface of lexicography for as long as dictionaries had existed, but the ain't controversy brought it into the open, made it a matter of public debate, put it on the front pages of newspapers, and in doing so, it revealed something important about what a dictionary actually is, or rather, what it can be, and what different people want it to be. For some, a dictionary is an authority, a standard bearer, a place where the correct forms of the language are enshrined and protected, and where going to look something up means submitting to a higher judgment about what is and isn't acceptable. For others, a dictionary is a mirror, a record of what a language actually looks like, held up faithfully so that we can see ourselves, see the way we actually speak and write and communicate, not the way some authority thinks we should. Both of these things are true of dictionaries, in different proportions at different times. And the tension between them, the ongoing, unresolved, genuinely interesting argument about what a dictionary is for, is part of what makes the history of lexicography so human, so full of personality and conflict and disagreement, because language belongs to everyone. And when you try to write it down, to fix it and define it and decide what counts and what doesn't, well, people have feelings about that. Webster knew that. He had feelings about it himself, very strong ones, and he expressed them across decades of work and argument and stubbornness. He wanted American English to be its own thing, and he made it so, or at least helped to make it so, one respelled word at a time. And the Merriams knew it too, in their own quieter way, knew that the point was not to keep the dictionary on a high shelf, but to put it in people's hands, to make it something lived with, argued over, consulted on a Tuesday evening by someone who just wants to know if they're spelling something right. That is the dictionary as a democratic object, as something that belongs not to scholars or clergy or the wealthy, but to anyone who opens it. Anyone who wants to understand a word, or settle an argument, or simply follow a chain of definitions from one entry to the next, getting happily lost in the long, branching, endlessly surprising forest of language. You don't have to go anywhere tonight. Just rest here, in the quiet. The words are all around you, patient and still, waiting to be looked up whenever you need them. And right now, you don't need any of them at all. Some projects are finished in a lifetime, some are finished in an afternoon, and some, the rarest and most extraordinary kind, are so large, so genuinely ambitious, so far beyond what any single person could accomplish alone, that they become something more than a project. They become a cause, a collective endeavor passed from hand to hand across decades, the way a torch is passed in a long relay race run through the dark, each runner carrying it as far as they can before passing it on to the next, trusting that someone will always be there to receive it. The Oxford English Dictionary was that kind of project. It began in 1857. It ended in 1928, 71 years. And in that time, it passed through the hands of editors and volunteers and scholars and ordinary readers from across the English-speaking world. People who gave months or years or, in some cases, entire lifetimes to the work of recording a language that would not hold still, that kept growing and changing even as they tried to write it down. The result was something unlike anything that had existed before. Not just the largest dictionary ever made, but a different kind of dictionary, a historical record of every word in the English language, traced from its earliest appearance in writing to its present use, illustrated at every stage with quotations, real quotations, from real texts, showing the word alive and in use across the centuries. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's begin at the beginning, in the way this history deserves, slowly, and with a proper sense of what was being attempted, and how quietly impossible it must have seemed. In 1857, a group of scholars belonging to the Philological Society of London, a learned organization devoted to the study of language, sat down and had a conversation that would, though none of them could quite have known it yet, shape the next 70 years of English lexicography. Their argument was this: the existing dictionaries were not good enough. Johnson's great work, for all its brilliance, was now a century old, and even in its time it had been the work of one man's reading and knowledge, inevitably partial and incomplete. The dictionaries that had followed it had improved and expanded, but they all shared the same fundamental limitation. They told you what a word meant now. They didn't tell you where it had come from, how it had changed, what it had meant in the hands of writers across the centuries. They gave you a snapshot, not a history. What the Philological Society wanted to create was a history, a full, complete, historically grounded record of every word in the English language, where it came from, when it first appeared in written form, how its meaning had shifted and evolved over time, what literary and documentary evidence existed for each stage of its development. Every word, every sense, every shade of meaning, documented and illustrated with real quotations from real sources. It was an idea of breathtaking scope, the kind of idea that, if you said it out loud and really thought about what it meant, would give almost anyone reasonable pause. The English language was vast and old and sprawling in every direction. To map it fully, historically, with documentary evidence, to do it properly, would require not just years of work, but decades. Would require not just scholars, but thousands of readers scouring millions of pages of text, noting every significant word and sending in their findings. The Philological Society decided to try anyway. The man appointed as the first editor of what was then being called the New English Dictionary, it would not acquire the name Oxford English Dictionary until much later, was a young scholar named Herbert Coleridge. He was 28 years old when he took on the work in 1857, the grandson of the great Romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and possessed of a quiet brilliance that impressed everyone who knew him. Coleridge drew himself into the project with the intensity of someone who understood its importance and wanted to give it everything he had. He set up systems for collecting and organizing the quotation slips that readers were already beginning to send in. Small pieces of paper, each one bearing a word, a quotation showing its use, and the source it came from. He began sketching out the structure of what the dictionary might look like, how it might be organized, how the historical evidence for each word might be presented. He had been working on it for less than 3 years when he contracted tuberculosis. He died in 1861, at the age of 30, though the difference matters little against the simple, quiet sadness of it. He had seen the very beginning of the project. He had helped to lay its foundations, and then he was gone, leaving behind an enormous task and a set of principles and systems that would guide the work long after him. There is something worth pausing on in that. The Oxford English Dictionary, one of the greatest scholarly achievements in the history of the English language, was begun by a young man who did not live to see even its earliest stages completed, who worked as hard and as carefully as he could, and then passed the torch on, not knowing who would carry it next or how far they would go. Rest a moment with that thought. The work we do, and who carries it forward after us. The editorship passed to others, and the work continued, slowly, fitfully, hampered by the sheer scale of what was being attempted and by the constant challenge of funding and organization. Years passed. The pile of quotation slips grew taller. Readers from across Britain and America and beyond were sending in their contributions. Thousands of slips, eventually hundreds of thousands, each one a small piece of evidence about how a word had been used at a particular moment in time. And then, in 1879, a Scottish schoolmaster named James Murray took on the editorship, and the project found the steady, patient, indomitable hand it needed. Murray was not, by the standards of the academic world of his time, a conventional choice for such a role. He had no university degree. He was largely self-taught, in the way that truly exceptional autodidacts sometimes are, having simply read his way through enormous quantities of material across a wide range of languages and subjects. He was a headmaster at a school in London, and he came to the dictionary not from a position of institutional prestige but from sheer intellectual passion and a gift for organization. He would need both. Murray moved the dictionary's working base to Oxford, where he had the support of the university press, and in his back garden in the Oxford suburb of Banbury Road, he built a small corrugated iron structure that he called the scriptorium. The word means a place for writing, borrowed from the medieval monastery rooms where scribes had copied manuscripts, a name that connected Murray's work, perhaps deliberately, to that much older tradition of preserving language through painstaking labor. The scriptorium was not glamorous. It was small and, by many accounts, rather cold in winter. It was filled, floor to ceiling, with the millions of quotation slips that had accumulated over decades of reading. Slips sorted into pigeonholes, slips in boxes, slips in bundles. Murray worked there for decades, surrounded by this extraordinary archive of the English language, writing and revising definitions, corresponding with volunteers, chasing down obscure quotations. and slowly, methodically, making his way through the alphabet. In 1884, 27 years after the Philological Society had first proposed the project, the first published section of the dictionary appeared. It was called a fascicle, a word for a separately published portion of a larger work, and it covered the letters A through ant, just A through ant, the words from A to antler, more or less, documented with the full historical apparatus that Murray and his colleagues had developed: earliest quotations, variant spellings, etymology, every shade of meaning carefully distinguished and illustrated. It was a beginning, a tangible, holdable, real beginning. After 27 years, there were pages. Of course, there were also many, many more letters to go. And Murray, writing in his introduction, acknowledged frankly that the completed dictionary was still a very long way away. He had been working on it for years, and would work on it for decades more. He died in 1915, still working, having reached the letter T. He never saw the project finished. Like Herbert Coleridge before him, Murray passed the torch on. Let that image settle gently. The torch, passing from hand to hand in the long DAC, each person carrying it as far as they can. Among the many thousands of people who contributed to the Oxford English Dictionary over its 70 years of creation, there is one name that tends to catch people by surprise when they encounter it. A name that belongs, in most people's minds, to an entirely different world, to middle-earth and hobbits and the elvish languages of a beloved fantasy novel. J.R.R. Tolkien worked on the Oxford English Dictionary. He joined the staff in 1919 as a young man fresh from the horrors of the First World War, and he worked there for about 2 years before leaving to take up an academic post. His particular assignment was the letter W, specifically the words beginning with WA, and then moving through into we and beyond. He worked on words like warm and wasp and water and walrus, tracing their etymologies, gathering their historical quotations, writing their definitions. The same mind that would later invent entire languages, Quenya and Sindarin and the other tongues of Middle Life, each one with its own grammar and history and sound, was here, in his early 20s, applying itself to the patient, detailed, etymological work of the OED, learning, in a very practical sense, how languages grow and change and borrow from one another, how a word carries its history inside it, layer upon layer, like rings in a tree. It is a connection that, once you know it, seems entirely right. Of course Tolkien worked on the dictionary. Of course the man who cared so deeply about the roots and music and history of words spent time in that careful, painstaking, scholarly tradition. The dictionary and the mythology were, in some deep sense, fed by the same passion. The Oxford English Dictionary was remarkable in other ways, too, ways that were, for their time, quietly progressive. In 1895, a woman named Mary Dormer Harris joined the editorial staff, becoming one of the first female editors to work on a major English dictionary. She was a historian and scholar in her own right, and her contribution to the OED was substantial. She worked on it for years, one of a number of women whose work helped to build the dictionary during a period when women were still excluded from most of the formal institutions of scholarship, from Oxford and Cambridge themselves, for instance, which did not grant degrees to women until 1920 and 1948 respectively. The dictionary, in other words, was in some ways ahead of the institutions that surrounded it. And then there was the question of the volunteers. From the very beginning, the OED had relied on an unprecedented public appeal, an invitation to ordinary readers, anywhere in the English-speaking world, to participate in the making of the dictionary by reading books and periodicals and sending in quotation slips for words and usages. This was not a small ask. It required readers to give significant time and careful attention, to go through text methodically and note every word that seemed significant, every usage that illustrated a meaning. They came in their thousands, men and women, scholars and amateurs, doctors and clergy and housewives and soldiers, reading their way through the literature of centuries and sending their findings to the scriptorium in Oxford. Some sent in a few dozen slips. Some sent in tens of thousands. One contributor, a former American Army surgeon named William Chester Minor, whose story is extraordinary and rather too complex to fully tell tonight, sent in an estimated 10 to 15,000 quotation slips from his own library, contributing enormously to the early stages of the dictionary while living under circumstances that Murray, when he finally met him, found deeply moving and unexpected. The OED was, in the most literal sense, a collective achievement, a project built by the labor of a generation, several generations, of people who believed that the language deserved to be recorded properly and were willing to give their time to make it happen. The completed dictionary was finally published in 1928. The full 12 volumes, the complete work, the finished thing that Herbert Coleridge had imagined in 1857 and James Murray had spent most of his life building. It contained 414,825 words. It documented the English language from its earliest recorded forms to the present day, with quotations drawn from texts spanning more than 1,000 years of written history. It was, and remains, the most comprehensive dictionary of any language ever created, an object of scholarship so thorough, so carefully made, so rich in its documentation of how English had moved and changed and grown across the centuries, that scholars still turn to it today. Not to a museum piece, but to a living resource, continuously updated in its online form, still expanding, still gathering quotations, still tracing the history of words that are entering the language right now, tonight, in the conversations and writings of people who will never know their words have been noted. 71 years, multiple editors, thousands of volunteers, a backyard iron shed, a young Tolkien tracing the roots of the word walrus, a woman scholar at work in a world that barely acknowledged her, quotation slips by the million, sorted into pigeonholes, waiting to be read, all of it in service of a single idea, that the English language deserved to be known fully, that every word had a history worth telling, that the past was present in every sentence we spoke, if only we took the time to look. There's something deeply peaceful about that kind of patience, about work that outlasts the people who began it, about the willingness to start something you know you will never finish, and to trust that it will be finished by others, by people you may never meet, working in a room you may never see, carrying forward something you began with care. Let that be with you now, as you rest, the patience of long work, the comfort of things that continue, the quiet knowledge that the words are all recorded somewhere, traced back to their beginnings, the meanings held safe, the histories preserved for anyone who wants to find them. Sleep, if sleep is ready. The dictionary is still growing, even now. And tonight, that is someone else's work to do. We have spent some time now in the company of the great and the serious, with scholars who devoted decades to their work, with editors who died at their desks, still writing, with volunteers who sent in tens of thousands of quotation slips out of pure love for the language. The history of dictionaries is, in many ways, a history of extraordinary dedication, of people who took the recording of words as seriously as anything could be taken. And yet, dictionaries are human, made by human hands, organized by human minds, checked and rechecked by human eyes that sometimes, despite their best efforts, miss something, or misread something, or, and this is where the story gets genuinely delightful, occasionally did something that was not quite a mistake, and not quite deliberate, but something in between, something that ended up in the dictionary anyway, sitting there quietly for years, waiting to be found. Tonight, in this part of our journey through the history of the dictionary, we're going to slow down and spend some time with the errors, with the accidents and the oversights and the oddities, with the ghost words, words that should never have existed, that were never used by anyone, that somehow found their way into the pages of serious reference works and stayed there long after they had any right to. Because if anything makes the dictionary feel more human, more warm, more alive, more like something made by real people rather than handed down from some perfect authority, it is the mistakes. And the dictionary, it turns out, has some wonderful ones. Let's begin with a word that appeared, with perfect seriousness, in one of the most authoritative American dictionaries of the 20th century. A word that was defined, cross-referenced, and indexed, and that sat in its alphabetical place for 5 years before anyone noticed that it had absolutely no right to be there. The word was dord. Dord appeared in Webster's New International Dictionary in its second edition, published in 1934. If you had looked it up, and many people did, presumably without suspicion, because why would you suspect anything? You would have found it listed as a noun, used in physics and chemistry, meaning density. It had a pronunciation guide. It had a part of speech. It looked, in every external respect, exactly like a real word. It was not a real word. The story of how it got there is, once you know it, almost endearingly mundane. Among the thousands of index cards that made up the raw material from which the dictionary was compiled, there was a card that read D or D, a notation meaning that the abbreviation for density could be written as either a capital D or a lowercase d somehow. In the process of sorting and filing and typesetting, this card was misread. The space was lost. D or D became dord. Someone, perhaps tired, perhaps working quickly, perhaps simply not questioning what seemed like an unfamiliar technical term, assigned it a definition and a part of speech, and into the dictionary it went. It stayed there for 5 years. 5 years of dord, sitting in its place between Dorcas and door, entirely undisturbed, entirely unquestioned, until 1939, when an editor named Austin Patterson was reviewing the dictionary's etymologies and noticed something troubling. The word dord had no etymology, no origin, no root in any language. It had simply appeared, fully formed, like a word that had arrived from nowhere. Patterson investigated. The truth emerged. A correction was issued. Dord was quietly removed. But for 5 years, it had been there. A phantom of a misread card, a word without a history, sitting in the dictionary with perfect composure. The Oxford English Dictionary had its own embarrassment of a different kind. Not a word that shouldn't have been there, but a word that should have been there and wasn't. Bondmaid, a simple enough word, meaning a female slave or bond servant, with a clear history in English going back to the Bible and beyond. It was, by any reasonable measure, exactly the kind of word that the OED existed to document. And yet, when scholars eventually checked, they found that it had been omitted, absent without explanation, passed over somewhere in the enormous process of reading and sorting and writing, and not noticed for 50 years. 50 years. Half a century during which anyone consulting the most comprehensive dictionary of the English language for the word bondmaid would have found nothing, would have been sent, by implication, away, as if the word had never existed. It was, eventually, added, but the omission is a useful reminder that even the most careful, most thorough, most extensively checked piece of scholarship in the history of the English language was made by people. And people miss things. No matter how painstakingly the work is done, no matter how many eyes go over every page, some things slip through the gaps, or fail to make it through at all. Let that be a gentle thought, if you'd like it. Even the OED has gaps. Perfection was never the point. But not all the phantom words in dictionary history arrived by accident. Some were put there deliberately, with intent, with care, and with a very specific purpose. They are called ghost words, or sometimes trap streets, borrowing a term from cartography, where mapmakers have long been known to insert small fictitious details into their maps as copyright traps. If a competitor's map shows the same invented street or the same non-existent village, the evidence of copying is clear. The dictionary equivalent works the same way. Insert a word that doesn't exist, give it a plausible-sounding definition, and wait. If the word turns up in a competitor's dictionary, you know where they got it. The most famous example, and arguably the most elegant, is a word called esquivalence. Esquivalence appeared in the New Oxford American Dictionary in its first edition, published in 2001. It was listed as a noun, defined as the willful avoidance of one's official responsibilities, and attributed to late 19th century French. It had the full apparatus of a real dictionary entry, etymology, pronunciation, everything. It looked completely convincing. It was entirely invented, made up by a member of the editorial staff named Christine Lindbergh, who coined it specifically as a copyright trap. The word had never been used by anyone, anywhere. It had no French origin, no 19th century history, no usage at all beyond its single, secret appearance in the dictionary. And it worked, or at least, it was found in the wild. The word eventually appeared on the website of a competing online dictionary, apparently copied from the New Oxford American, which was precisely the kind of evidence the trap had been designed to produce. Esquivalence, the willful avoidance of one's official responsibilities. It is, as invented words go, a rather good one, and it has a certain pleasing irony to it. A word about avoidance that was itself carefully, industriously created. There was nothing esquivalent about the making of it. Breathe slowly. There's a quiet delight in words that shouldn't exist, finding their way into the world anyway. The Collins-Coble Dictionary, a significant British dictionary first published in 1987, notable for its use of real language corpora to inform its definitions, had its own small piece of lexicographic mischief. Among its entries, the word hink appeared. It had a definition. It looked reasonable enough, the way these things do when they're sitting in alphabetical order among thousands of genuine words. It was an internal joke, a word inserted, apparently, by someone on the editorial team, whether as a copyright trap or simply as a small, private act of playfulness hidden in the middle of an enormous serious project. The record is not entirely clear, but there it was. Hink, in the dictionary, meaning whatever its inventor had decided it meant, sitting patiently in its place, perhaps for years, before being found and removed. One likes to imagine the person who put it there, waking late, surrounded by the serious machinery of lexicography, and quietly slipping in a word that no one had ever used, just to see if anyone would notice. And then there's the longest word, or at least, a word that has a strong claim to that title in English, a word of 4 to 5 letters that turns up in word record books and trivia questions, and is almost impossible to say correctly without practice. The word is pneumonultramicroscopic silicovolcaniconiosis. Say it slowly, if you like. Or don't. It doesn't particularly matter. It refers to a lung disease caused by the inhalation of very fine silica dust from volcanoes, a condition that does exist and is related to similar silica dust diseases. But the word itself was not coined by doctors to describe their patient's symptoms, or by scientists precisely naming a condition they had identified. It was coined, in 1935, by a man named Everett Smith, who was the president of the National Puzzlers League, an organization devoted to wordplay and linguistic games, and who created it specifically for the purpose of having the longest word in the English language. It was, from the beginning, partly a joke, a deliberate construction, assembled from real roots that could plausibly mean what the word claimed to mean, but designed primarily for its own remarkable length. It found its way into dictionaries anyway, because once a word exists, once people are using it and referring to it, even in the context of discussing its own artificiality, the dictionary has to make a decision about it, and the dictionary, more often than not, lets it in. This is what all of these stories, Dord and bondmaiden equivalents and Hink and the longest word, are really telling us. They are telling us that the dictionary is not a perfect object, that it was never meant to be a perfect object, that it is, instead, something more interesting and more human than perfection would allow. It is a record of the ongoing, messy, sometimes comic, endlessly surprising project of language. And language, by its very nature, resists being perfectly recorded. It moves too fast. It is used by too many people in too many different ways. It contains accidents and jokes and errors and inventions and words that were put in deliberately and words that slipped in by mistake and words that were left out for 50 years without anyone noticing. The dictionary tries its best, and in the trying, in the long, patient, imperfect, wonderfully human effort of it, it becomes something more valuable than a perfect record could ever be. It becomes a mirror, held up to language and to the people who use it, and showing us both, flaws and all. Let your breathing slow, now. Let the errors and the ghost words and the phantom density terms drift gently through your mind and away. There's nothing to hold on to, just the quiet pleasure of knowing that even the most serious things have a little mischief in them. Change, when it comes to something as old and established as the dictionary, tends to arrive quietly at first, not with a dramatic announcement, not with an obvious before and after moment that everyone recognizes in real time as a turning point. It arrives the way most deep changes arrive, gradually, almost imperceptibly, in the form of small decisions made by individuals and institutions, each one seeming modest and practical in the moment, but accumulating, over years and decades, into something genuinely transformative. The digitization of the dictionary was like that. It didn't happen all at once. It didn't happen because of a single invention or a single decision. It happened through a long series of quiet steps, taken by people who were, in many cases, simply trying to solve practical problems, trying to make information more accessible, more searchable, more easily updated. And the accumulated effect of those steps was to change, fundamentally, what a dictionary was, what it could be, what it meant to look something up. Tonight, in this part of our journey, we're going to follow those steps, from the very first efforts to put the written word into a form that a machine could read, all the way to the moment when the greatest dictionary ever made moved from its 12 heavy volumes into something that anyone, anywhere, with a connection to the internet, could search in an instant. It's a gentle story, a quiet revolution, the best kind. In 1971, a young man named Michael Hart was a student at the University of Illinois. He had been given access, through the university, to one of the large mainframe computer networks that were, at that time, among the most powerful information processing systems in existence, remarkable machines that occupied entire rooms and were connected to a small number of other computers at universities and research institutions around the country. Hart had been given an account on this network, and with it, a certain amount of computer time to use as he chose. And what he chose to do, on the 4th of July, 1971, which was both the date the thought occurred to him and the 95th anniversary of American independence, a coincidence he seems to have appreciated, was to type out the text of the United States Declaration of Independence and make it available on the network for anyone to download. It was a small thing, a simple thing. The file was tiny by any modern standard, and the number of people who could access it was vanishingly small. Only a handful of institutions were connected to the network at all. But the idea behind it was large. Hart believed that computers would eventually be in the hands of ordinary people, and that when that day came, the ability to store and share the world's great texts electronically would be enormously valuable. He called his project Project Gutenberg, after the man whose printing press had first enabled the mass reproduction of books 5 centuries earlier. It was an apt comparison. Gutenberg's press had taken the written word and made it reproducible, portable, affordable. Project Gutenberg was attempting something similar for the digital age, making texts freely available in a form that required no physical object, no shelf, no bookshop, just a file, readable on a machine. Project Gutenberg continued, slowly and steadily, through the 1970s and 1980s and into the 1990s, digitizing texts one by one, classic literature, historical documents, reference works, and making them freely available. By the time the internet had grown into something that ordinary people could access from their own homes, Project Gutenberg had already accumulated a substantial archive. The infrastructure of the digital library was being built, quietly and patiently, before most people knew they would need it. Meanwhile, at Oxford, the team working on the Oxford English Dictionary was grappling with a different but related problem. By the 1980s, the OED was in a peculiar position. It was, by universal acknowledgement, the greatest dictionary of the English language ever made. It was also, in its physical form, almost impossible to use. 12 large volumes, containing more than 400,000 entries, could not be quickly searched. If you wanted to find a word, you had to know roughly where it was in the alphabet, pick up the right volume, and look. If you wanted to find all the words derived from a particular root, all the words that entered English from French in the 14th century, or all the words illustrated with quotations from Shakespeare, you couldn't. Not without reading every single page. The information was all there. Every connection, every pattern, every thread that linked the words together across centuries of usage. But it was locked inside a linear alphabetical arrangement that made it accessible in only one way, one word at a time. A digital version would change all of that entirely. The project of converting the OED into a digital form began in the mid-1980s, and it was itself an enormous undertaking. Every page of all 12 volumes had to be scanned and the text converted into a form that a computer could process, a process called optical character recognition, painstaking and imperfect, requiring enormous human effort to check and correct. The work took years. In 1992, the first CD-IOM edition of the OED was released. A single compact disc containing all 12 volumes, the entirety of the most comprehensive dictionary ever made, searchable in seconds, fitting in the palm of a hand. To the people who had spent their working lives surrounded by the physical volumes, who had spent hours or days tracking down particular quotations or tracing particular etymological connections through the printed pages, the CD-IOM was something close to miraculous. A search that had once taken a day now took a moment. A connection that had been invisible, buried in the physical arrangement of the text, now became instantly visible the moment you typed the right query. Let that image settle softly. The miracle of the searchable word. All that knowledge, suddenly navigable. By 2000, Oxford University Press had taken the next step, launching the OED Online, a version of the dictionary accessible through an internet browser, bringing together all 20 volumes of the second edition into a single searchable database. For the first time in its history, the OED was available to anyone with an internet connection and a subscription. Libraries subscribed, making it available to their patrons. Universities subscribed. Individuals subscribed. The dictionary had, in a sense, completed a journey that had begun with Gutenberg's press 5.5 centuries earlier. The journey from the rare and the expensive and the difficult to access, toward the available and the searchable and the immediate. But the online version did something else, too. Something that the physical volumes, by their very nature, could never have done. It made updating possible. Genuinely, continuously possible. A printed dictionary, no matter how carefully made, is fixed at the moment of printing. The language moves on. New words arrive. Old words shift in meaning. Usage changes. And the dictionary stays where it was, slowly falling behind the living reality it was meant to record. A new edition has to be prepared, printed, and published before any of those changes can be reflected, and that process takes years. The dictionary is always, to some degree, looking at the past. A digital dictionary doesn't have that constraint. Changes can be made, corrections can be entered, new words can be added, not in the next edition, not in 5 years' time, but now. The moment a decision is made about a new entry, that entry can be live. In 2009, the OED formalized this shift, moving to what's called a full XML workflow, a technical change that might sound dry but was, in practice, profoundly significant. XML is a way of structuring digital information so that every element, every definition, every quotation, every etymological note, every date, is individually tagged and identifiable. It means that any part of any entry can be updated independently, without affecting the rest. It means that the dictionary can be changed, continuously, in a way that is organized and consistent and permanent. The OED was, for the first time in its history, no longer a project that would one day be finished. It had become something perpetual, an ongoing record of a living language, updated as the language changed. Never quite complete because the language it was recording was never quite complete either. There is something beautifully appropriate about that. The English language has never stopped growing. It has been borrowing and adapting and coining new words since before there were dictionaries to record them. The idea that a dictionary of English could ever be truly finished was always, in some sense, a useful fiction. The fiction that allowed editors to put a final volume on the shelf and call it done. The digital OED simply acknowledged what had always been true. The work continues. The language continues. The two move forward together, one always slightly behind the other, always reaching toward it. By 2007, a remarkable threshold had been crossed in the broader world of information. 94% of all global information storage was digital. Not on paper, not on clay tablets, not inscribed in stone or pressed into wax, but stored in electronic form, on servers and hard drives and the vast distributed infrastructure of the internet. 94%, almost everything. The transformation that had begun with Michael Hart typing out the Declaration of Independence on a university mainframe in 1971 had, in 36 years, become nearly complete. The world's information had migrated, overwhelmingly, into a new medium, and the dictionary had migrated with it. This was not simply a change in format. It was a change in what a dictionary was. For centuries, from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia to the 2-volume weight of Webster's Great Work, from the scriptorium in Murray's Oxford Garden to the 12 volumes of the completed OED, a dictionary had been a physical object, something with heft, with pages, with a specific place on a shelf, something you went to, rather than something that came to you. The digital dictionary was different in every one of those ways. It had no weight. It had no pages in any physical sense. It had no single place. It could be on your desk and in your pocket and on the other side of the world simultaneously. You didn't go to it. It was already there, wherever you happened to be, waiting, and it was always growing, always being added to, corrected, updated, a living thing, in a way that the printed dictionary, for all its grandeur, could never quite be. It is worth pausing, at the end of this part of the story, to notice the thread that runs from the very beginning all the way to Hay, from the Sumerian scribe pressing a stylus into damp clay, to the medieval copyist bent over a manuscript in a cold scriptorium, to Gutenberg casting his metal letters, to Murray in his corrugated iron shed surrounded by quotation slips, to Michael Hart typing out a text on a university mainframe. The impulse is the same. To record language, to make it available, to put it in the hands of people who need it. The tools have changed, enormously. The scale has changed, in ways that would be incomprehensible to anyone who lived before them. But the impulse has not changed at all. It is the same impulse that made those first Sumerian word lists, the same impulse that drove Herbert Coleridge and James Murray and all the thousands of volunteers who sent in their quotation slips, the same impulse that makes someone, right now, somewhere in the world, updating an entry in the OED online because they found an alias citation for a word than the one currently recorded. Caring about words, wanting to get them right, wanting to make them available. That has always been what this was about. Let the thought drift away now, like words dissolving into quiet. The dictionary is still out there, still growing, still recording, and you don't have to do anything at all. Just rest. Just breathe. The language will take care of itself tonight. There is a particular kind of surprise that history sometimes offers. The surprise of discovering that two things you thought were entirely separate, entirely different in nature and purpose and spirit, were actually connected all along. That a thread runs between them, quiet and unbroken, from one to the other. That what seemed like a beginning was also, in ways nobody quite recognized at the time, a continuation. The connection between the dictionary and artificial intelligence is like that. When we think of AI, of the machine translation systems that convert a web page from Japanese to English in an instant, of the autocomplete suggestions that appear as you type a message on your phone, of the voice assistant that understands your question and answers it, we tend to think of something entirely modern. Something born in the age of computers and data and algorithms, with no particular relationship to the long, patient, human history of lexicography that we've been exploring tonight. But that's not quite right. The history of machine language, of computers learning to understand and work with words, begins, in a very direct sense, with the dictionary, with word lists, with the same fundamental project that the Sumerian scribes were engaged in when they pressed the names of plants and animals and gods into damp clay. The project of making meaning available in a form that can be looked up, accessed, processed. It is a very old project, and it turns out that teaching a machine to understand languages, at its heart, the same project, just much, much faster. In the early 1950s, the field of what we now call machine translation was in its infancy. Not even that, really. It was more like a hypothesis, a question being asked out loud by a small number of researchers who believed, with varying degrees of confidence, that it might one day be possible to teach a computer to translate text from one language to another. The question was, on its face, enormous. Language is extraordinarily complex. It is ambiguous. The same word can mean different things in different contexts. It is idiomatic. Phrases carry meanings that have nothing to do with the individual meanings of the words they contain. It is subtle, culturally specific, full of implications and connotations that a fluent speaker understands instinctively and that resist simple, mechanical description. And yet, the early researchers had a starting point, a place from which to begin, even if they couldn't yet see how far the road ahead extended. That starting point was the dictionary. If you want a machine to translate a sentence from Russian to English, the most basic thing you need to give it is a record of which Russian words correspond to which English words. A bilingual word list. A dictionary. In other words, the same kind of document that Sumerian Akkadian scholars had been making in 2300 BCE. The same kind of document that had been driving translation work for thousands of years. The fundamental tool of the translator, now being handed to a machine. In January of 1954, at the IBM research headquarters in New York, a demonstration took place that drew considerable attention from both the scientific community and the press. It was called the Georgetown IBM experiment, and it was the first public demonstration of machine translation, the first time a computer had been shown to translate text from one language to another in front of an audience. The system was, by latest standards, extraordinarily simple. It knew 60 Russian words. It had 6 grammar rules, and it used a lookup dictionary, a a direct mapping of Russian words to English equivalents, to translate a set of carefully chosen Russian sentences into English. The sentences had been selected specifically because they were translatable by this simple method. Nobody was under the illusion that the system could handle the full complexity of Russian, but the demonstration worked. The machine produced recognizable English translations of the Russian input, and the researchers involved, caught up in the excitement of the moment, made a prediction that would turn out to be considerably optimistic, that fully automatic, high-quality machine translation was perhaps 3 to 5 years away. It was not 3 to 5 years away. The problem was vastly harder than the early optimism suggested. The complexity of language, all that ambiguity and idiom and context and cultural specificity, resisted the straightforward dictionary lookup approach with an obstinacy that would humble researchers for decades. But the Georgetown IBM experiment had established something important. It had shown that the idea was not absurd, that machines and language could, in principle, be brought together, and it had done so using, at its foundation, a dictionary. Let your thoughts be easy now. There's nothing complicated required of you tonight. Just a gentle drift of ideas, one following another. In the decades that followed, machine translation researchers tried various approaches to the problem. The earliest systems were rule-based. They worked by encoding the grammatical rules of the source and target languages, along with dictionary mappings between words, and applying those rules systematically to transform one language into the other. It was a painstaking approach, requiring linguists to sit down and articulate, explicitly and precisely, the rules that fluent speakers of a language follow intuitively without ever thinking about them. This is harder than it sounds. The rules of natural language are not like the rules of mathematics. They are full of exceptions, and exceptions to the exceptions, and cases where the exception to the exception has its own exception. Human language did not develop according to a logical plan. It grew, organically, through centuries of use, accumulating irregularities and anomalies the way a river accumulates bends, not because anyone designed it that way, but simply because that's how living systems develop. Rule-based translation systems worked, up to a point. They could handle straightforward, predictable sentences reasonably well, but they struggled with the messiness and ambiguity of real language as real people actually used it. A word like bank might mean a financial institution or the side of a river, and a rule-based system needed explicit instructions about how to tell them apart in every possible context. The next major shift came with statistical approaches. Instead of encoding rules, statistical translation systems learned patterns from large amounts of existing translated text, effectively teaching themselves, by examining millions of examples of human translation, which word in one language was most likely to correspond to which word in another, in which contexts. This approach handled ambiguity better, because it was based on probability, on the accumulated evidence of how human translators had actually resolved ambiguous cases, rather than on explicit rules. Dictionaries were still part of this, the underlying vocabulary mappings, the basic correspondence between words across languages, remained essential, but the system was now doing something more sophisticated than simple lookup. It was learning from context. It was making probabilistic judgments. It was, in a limited sense, beginning to understand not just what words meant in isolation, but how they behaved in the company of other words. And then, after 2014, came the approach that would transform the field entirely. Neural machine translation, systems based on artificial neural networks, loosely inspired by the structure of a human brain, that learned to translate by processing enormous quantities of text in a fundamentally different way from their predecessors. Neural translation systems didn't translate word by word, or even phrase by phrase. They processed entire sentences, entire paragraphs, building up a rich internal representation of the meaning of the source text before generating the translation. They learned to hold context in mind across long stretches of language. They became sensitive to nuance and tone and register in ways that earlier systems couldn't approach. These systems still used dictionaries. In a sense, they still needed to know the vocabulary of the languages they were working with. But the relationship between the system and the word had changed. A word was no longer just a unit to be looked up and replaced with its equivalent. It was a node in a vast network of relationships, connected to other words, to contexts, to patterns of usage, to the accumulated weight of everything the system had learned from its training data. In 2018, a system called BAIT, bidirectional encoder representations from transformers, to give it its full and rather imposing name, took this further still. BAIT was trained not to translate, specifically, but to understand language, to build, for any given word in any given sentence, a rich contextual representation that captured not just what the word meant in general, but what it meant here, in this sentence, surrounded by these other words. It understood, in other words, that the bank you deposit money in and the bank of a river are the same word in two entirely different lives. And it could tell them apart, not because it had been given a rule that said so, but because it had read enough language, in enough contexts, to have learned the difference the way a human reader learns it, through exposure, through pattern, through the gradual accumulation of understanding. What BAIT and the systems that followed it were doing, what all the neural translation systems and language models and autocomplete algorithms are doing, right now, in the background of the devices and applications that most of us use every day, is, at its deepest level, the same thing that the dictionary has always been trying to do. Make meaning available, make it processable, make it transferable from one mind, or one machine, to another. The Sumerian scribe and the neural network are not, in the end, doing entirely different things. Both are trying to take the vast, slippery, context-dependent thing that language is, and render it in a form that someone, or something, can work with. Both are trying to bridge the gap between the word and its meaning, between the sound or the symbol and the thing it represents. The scribe used to read in a clay tablet. The neural network uses layers of mathematical transformations applied to billions of parameters trained on hundreds of billions of words. The tools are, to put it mildly, different, but the impulse is the same. Tonight, as you rest, the language models are still running, somewhere in a data center, on servers drawing power from the grid, systems that grew, however indirectly, however complexly, from the same root as the clay tablets and the scriptorium and the ghost word door, are processing language, answering questions, translating messages between people who don't share a language, finishing sentences, searching for meaning. The dictionary became a database. The database became a model. The model became something that thinks about words in a way that no individual human ever could, holding the patterns of billions of sentences in its parameters, finding connections across the whole vast recorded history of human language. It is a long way from West Hartford, Connecticut, where Noah Webster stood at his writing desk, a very long way from the backyard scriptorium in Oxford, and the millions of quotation slips in their pigeonholes, a very long way from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia. And yet, the thread is there. Follow it back far enough and you find the same beginning. Someone trying to write down what things mean. Let that be the last thought of this part of the journey. The unbroken thread, running all the way from the first word list to the latest language model. Long and quiet and continuous, like a slow river moving through a flat landscape in the early morning. Rest now. Let the words process themselves, as they always do, without any help from you. We are near the end of our journey now. Not the end of the dictionary story. That story is still being written, still being updated, still accumulating new entries in real time somewhere on a server that hums quietly through the night. But the end of our journey through it, tonight, in this slow and meandering passage through the history of words. And before we arrive at that ending, I want to linger here for a while, in this last part of the story, because this part is, in some ways, the most important, not the most dramatic, not the most surprising, not the most full of unexpected facts and ghost words and misfiled index cards, but the most important, because this is the part where we ask the question that everything else has been building toward, whether we knew it or not. In a world where language can be looked up instantly on a screen, where AI systems can translate and generate an autocomplete in milliseconds, where the question of what a word means is never more than a few seconds from an answer, why do dictionaries still matter? What are they still doing? What is their purpose, now that the practical problem they were invented to solve has been, in so many ways, solved? The answer, it turns out, is larger and quieter and more profound than the question suggests. Dictionaries don't just record language, they record history. Let's stay with that thought for a moment. Let it settle into its full meaning, the way a stone settles into still water. When Samuel Johnson published his dictionary in 1755, he did more than list the words of the English language and explain what they meant. He captured, in the very act of defining and illustrating and organizing those words, a picture of the English-speaking world as it was at that moment. The words he chose to include, and those he left out, the literary authorities he cited, the assumptions embedded in his definitions, some of them brilliant and precise, some of them showing the limitations and biases of his time and place with uncomfortable clarity. All of it is there, in the pages of that dictionary. Not just language, history. When Noah Webster decided that American English would spell color without a U, he was not just making a practical decision about spelling. He was making a statement about identity, about what America was and what it was not, about the relationship between a new nation and the old world it had broken from. The dictionary was the instrument through which that statement was made permanent, written into the spelling habits of a nation that still follows Webster's choices today. More than 2 centuries later, the dictionary shaped American identity. It didn't just reflect it, and this shaping has continued, in ways both gradual and sudden, right up to the present day. Because every time a dictionary adds a word, or updates a definition, or removes an entry that no longer reflects current usage, it is making a judgment. A small, carefully considered, enormously consequential judgment about what the language is, what it includes, what it means, what it values. Think about the word marriage. For most of the history of the English language, dictionaries defined it in terms that assumed a union between a man and a woman. That was simply what the word meant, or rather, that was what the word had meant, for as long as the social reality it described had been what it was. As that social reality began to change, as same-sex relationships gained legal recognition in country after country, as the cultural understanding of what marriage could be began to shift, dictionaries had a decision to make. They updated their definitions, quietly, carefully, after considerable thought, and in doing so, they participated in a social change that was larger than language. They said, in the way that only a dictionary can say something, with the particular authority of the reference weight, the particular weight of the definition. Yes, this is what the word means now. The word has grown. The world has grown. Here is the new definition. Or think about gender, a word whose meaning has shifted and expanded and deepened in the public conversation of the last few decades. Dictionaries have followed that shift, updating and expanding their entries to reflect the way the word is now used, the distinctions being drawn, the concept being named, the conversations being had. In doing so, they have not created those shifts. They have recorded them, legitimized them, in a sense, by acknowledging that this is now how the word is used by real people in real conversations. Breathe gently. The world is always changing, and the dictionary is always watching. Sometimes the words that enter the dictionary seem small, ordinary, almost trivial, compared to the large social movements and identity-shaping definitions we've just been considering. Selfie entered the Oxford English Dictionary in 2013, a word coined in an Australian internet forum in 2002, used casually and playfully to describe a photograph taken of oneself, usually on a mobile phone. By 2013, it had spread through the language with the speed that only the internet makes possible, and the OED, updating in ways that the printed dictionary of previous centuries never could, added it. Hashtag followed. Social distancing, a phrase that had existed in epidemiological literature for years but that entered the everyday vocabulary of the entire world with sudden, startling force in 2020, was added with unusual speed, reflecting the OED's recognition that sometimes language changes not gradually but overnight. These words might seem lightweight beside marriage and gender, but they are not, really. They are records of how we lived, what we did, what we worried about, what we invented to communicate with each other. Someone, 50 years from now, reading through the entries added to the Oxford English Dictionary in the early 21st century, will find a picture of this time. Not a complete picture. Language is never a complete picture of the people who use it, but a real one, a genuine record. Selfie. We took photographs of ourselves and shared them with the world. That is something about us, something true and particular to this moment in history, and the dictionary has written it down. The dictionary has also recorded movements, social movements that changed the world, or are changing it still. When the #MeToo movement began in 2017 and spread across the world with extraordinary speed, it brought with it a language, a vocabulary for experiences that had long existed but had not always had words, at least not words that were widely shared and understood. Dictionaries noted the emergence of this vocabulary, tracked the new usages, updated entries for existing words whose meanings had been extended and sharpened by the conversations happening across the culture. When the Black Lives Matter movement brought questions of race and justice and systemic inequality into sharp public focus, dictionaries responded. Some updated definitions that had been written in less considered times. Some added new terms that the movement had put into wider circulation. The process was not always smooth or uncontroversial. Decisions about language are never made in a vacuum, and the people making them bring their own perspectives and limitations. But the attempt was made. The dictionary tried, as it has always tried, to reflect the language as it was actually being used, including in the most urgent and serious conversations of the day. This is what it means to say that dictionaries record history. Not just the history of words, but the history of the conversations those words are used in. The history of what people were talking about, what they were arguing over, what they were trying to say. There's a way of thinking about the dictionary that has always appealed to me. Not as an authority, not as a judge that decides what is and isn't a real word, what is and isn't correct usage, but as a witness, a patient, attentive, endlessly careful witness to the life of a language and the people who speak it. A witness doesn't control what it sees. It doesn't decide what happens. It simply attends, carefully, thoroughly, honestly, and records. It says, this is what occurred. This is what was said. This is how the word was used, by these people, in these places, at this time. The dictionary as witness has been present at every major moment in the history of the English language. At the moment when English was a minor dialect spoken on a damp island at the edge of the known world, and the moment when it became the most widely spoken language on earth, at the moment when it was fixed in the amber of Johnson's Great Wake, and the moment when Webster declared its independence, at the moment when the first fascicle of the OED appeared, covering a through and after 27 years of preparation, and the moment when the whole vast enterprise moved online and became continuous and perpetual. It has been there, watching, recording, writing it all down. And so we come, at last, to tonight, to this moment, wherever you are, whatever room you're in, whatever corner of the English-speaking world you inhabit. The dictionary is still there, still watching, still being updated, somewhere, right now, by someone who has found an earlier citation for a word, or identified a new usage that needs to be recorded, or decided that a definition written 30 years ago no longer quite captures what the word means today. The work continues, as it has always continued, imperfect, human, patient, and ongoing. And the words themselves, the words you use today, without thinking about them, in your conversations and your thoughts and the quiet internal monologue that runs through all our days, those words have histories. Long, complicated, sometimes surprising histories. They arrived in English from French, from Latin, from Norse, from the languages of trade and conquest and migration and cultural exchange. They shifted in meaning across the centuries, picked up new associations, shed old ones, traveled to new continents and came back changed. They were pressed into clay, copied by firelight, set in metal type, digitized and searched and processed by neural networks that no one had imagined when the first dictionary was made. Every word you know is a small piece of that history, carried quietly, used without ceremony, doing its work in the ordinary way that ordinary things do, but with a depth behind it that goes all the way back to the beginning. That is why dictionaries still matter. Not because we need them to tell us what words mean, though we do. Still, all of us, reach for them when we're uncertain. Not because they are authorities to be deferred to, though there is something reassuring about their care and their thoroughness, but because they are keeping the record, because they are the place where the history of language is held, preserved, made accessible, because somewhere in the long chain of people who made them and contributed to them and used them, from the Sumerian scribes to Herbert Coleridge dying at 32 with the project barely begun, from James Murray in his iron shed to the volunteers who sent in their quotation slips by the tens of thousands, from Robert Corddry with his modest book of hard words to the editorial teams updating the OED online in real time. All of them were doing the same thing, caring about words, believing that they mattered, that language was worth the trouble of recording properly, of getting right, of preserving for whoever came next. And whoever came next was, among others, you, reading or listening tonight, using the language that all of them helped to build and record and maintain, carrying it forward without knowing it, the way everyone carries their language forward, simply by using it, day after day, in the ordinary business of being alive. The dictionary is a monument to that, to the ordinary miracle of language, to the fact that human beings, across thousands of years and dozens of cultures and every kind of circumstance, have always made meaning together, have always needed to understand each other, have always, in the end, been trying to say something true. Rest now. The words are all around you, patient and quiet, doing nothing in particular, not asking to be looked up or defined or traced to their origins. Just there, the way the air is there, so familiar, so constant, that you mostly don't notice them at all. That is what it means to live inside a language, to be so thoroughly at home in it that its presence is invisible, like water to a fish. And the dictionary, all the dictionaries, going all the way back, are simply the record of that home, drawn up carefully, over centuries, by people who looked at language and thought, this is worth knowing about, this is worth writing down. They were right. Sleep well. The story of the dictionary continues, as it always has, without needing anything from you. The words are safe. The record is being kept. And tonight, that is more than enough.